This document with me is the Female Offender Strategy. It was released in 2018 by the Ministry of Justice with the hopes of improving outcomes for women in the criminal justice system. The report set out 3 strategic priorities. One of them was to have fewer women in custody. Well, most recent figures show that overall numbers of female in prison have fallen. To be exact, they went from 3,958 in February 2017 to 3,171 in December 2022. However, the Ministry of Justice itself now predicts that there will be an increase in the female population by more than a third in the next 3 years. This projection has led to many charities questioning whether the criminal justice system is really working for women. Well, one of those organisations is Advance, a leading national charity of almost 25 years, which is mostly funded by the Ministry of Justice. On average, Advance provides direct support to more than 8,000 women and their children each year. I spoke to their CEO, Nikki Scordi. I began by asking her how worried the words of the very institution that funds her organisation make her.
Incredibly worried, particularly because we have spent, as a sector and Advance ourselves, we have spent decades providing evidence from the thousands of women we help every year of what works and what doesn't work. And the Ministry of Justice in 2018 issued its own female offender strategy, recognizing that most women are there for very short times in custody, that actually prison doesn't work. It increases reoffending as opposed to reducing it, and that there are much better alternatives like services like ourselves in the community, and that's where we should be investing. We know what the solutions that work. We know that it costs about just over £2,000 a year to help a woman in the community. It costs over £50,000 to help to put a woman in prison. Why would we spend £50,000 for something we've all agreed, both the Ministry of Justice and women and ourselves and every other criminal justice agency, that it doesn't work? We know for every woman, only 1 out of 4 women, the children will stay with the father. Usually 3 out of 4 children will have to either go to care or other arrangements. Whereas when a man goes to prison, it's about 9 out of 10 children will stay with the mother or family. And therefore, there is real impact on the whole family when a woman goes to prison.
Advance are asking the government for a greater investment in resourcing community services such as theirs, instead of funding to build more prisons.
There is no excuse for what is being proposed. We should be looking at why it is that we think that prison population will go down. On a positive note, the prison population has gone down for women, a slight amount, but in the right direction for the last 3 years. Why would it go worse? And we need to reflect on coming out of a pandemic where we've all learned that the community can really turn things around for each other, where actually the solutions are in our own communities and not in an institution. Why are we not investing in that? It seems to me to be going against everything that the Ministry of Justice and the government had said is the right thing to do, and that they need to be allowing us to do the work that we need to do in the community and not considering it as a luxury.
Among the various initiatives at Advance is the Peer Mentor Programme. It's where previous offenders turned volunteers provide one-to-one support to current offenders.
So we now have over 35 volunteers at any one time. They work with women who are going through it themselves at the moment, so they're able to give back, which is fantastic and brilliant. Women helping other women to get through what is incredibly difficult and traumatic. I know you spoke to a number of the women we've supported, who one of them is now a volunteer with us and helping other women. And every story is incredibly shocking that it has taken, and devastating that it has taken this long for somebody who actually needed help and needed support and instead got a prison sentence.
One of those women I spoke to is Sophie. She served a sentence in prison herself while she was pregnant. Sophie is not her real name. To protect identity, I've kept her anonymous and distorted her voice.
I was arrested for counterfeit money. the reason why I was doing that as single mum on my own. I'd been fleeing a really abusive relationship, suffering with mental health, and I had problems with substance misuse at that time as well. In my opinion, I didn't do anything violent. I didn't hurt anybody. I think if the courts kind of knew my history and what was happening around me committing the crime, they would kind of understand why I did it in the first place. It's a difficult one because I do understand the criminal justice system, but at the same time, I think if I'd got support with what was going on with me, then I wouldn't have committed the crime in the first place. You know what I mean?
Sophie received her 15-month sentence at 3 months pregnant and was released early to give birth around 6 months later. She described her experience inside as extremely traumatic for a mother-to-be.
I did struggle in prison being pregnant. It was awful. I was pregnant during the summer. The cells were small. There was no windows. They just had little vents. And on a Sunday, we were locked in our cells from 5 o'clock till 8 o'clock the next morning. I tried to make the best out of the situation, but I didn't enjoy my pregnancy, not one bit. I think the one thing that probably got me through my sentence was being pregnant because I had my daughter with me, but in terms of preparation for the baby being born, there was absolutely none.
Could I ask you what the toughest thing was to deal with when you were inside prison? Sophie broke down in tears. It was not being able to see her 10-year-old son.
The thing is, it's like talking about it, you don't think about it every day, but just remembering how it felt. You know, that is the worst when you're sat waiting to see your child and they don't, and you see all the other families and you sit there waiting and they don't turn up because you look forward to that for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's the only thing that keeps you going in there.
We took a brief break and then continued where we left off.
Separating a mum from her child is horrific. And I don't think you can explain that to anybody. Unless it's happened to you, nobody will understand the feeling of having your child, not being able to put your baby to bed, not being able to say goodnight and kiss them on the forehead, not being able to take them to school.
When Sophie was released from prison, the situation on the outside didn't get easier for her.
It was just horrific, the way the system treated me after I came out of prison and the way they made me feel as a mother. You know, the threat of taking away they dangled my kids in front of my face like this every day until the point where I had no fight left in me anymore. I had no fight left in me anymore. I mean, I can't change what's happened. I think if I was to speak to my younger self, I'd probably tell her to love herself a bit more and not to be so encouraged and try to fit in so much with a certain crowd. But it's difficult because my younger self was all by herself. And what could I say to her? I don't think I could have said anything to her that would have changed what would have happened.
Sophie's now become a mentor at Advance and has hopes of supporting females who experience what she's experienced.
I want to help the younger women, girls, before all of this stuff happens. Help guide them in the right direction. Give them the help that I never got. Because I do believe that if you help the younger ones, it stops them growing into, and then it stops them having babies and then growing up their children like that, you know? I feel really strongly about that. So that's my aspirations for the future. and hopefully I'm heading in the right direction for that.
Responding to all the comments from Nikki and Sophie, a spokesperson for the Ministry of Justice said,
"Custody is already a last resort for women, and reducing reoffending is a key priority for this government. The number of women in prison has fallen by a quarter since 2010, and we continue to work to reduce reoffending amongst females following the launch of our female offender strategy. We are investing millions into community services like women's centres and drug rehabilitation, so even fewer end up there, and have also made significant improvements for the small number of pregnant women in custody. We now have specialist mother and baby liaison officers in every women's prison, have put in place additional welfare observations, and provide better screening and social services support so that pregnant prisoners get the care they require."
Ever since the 2007 Corsten report, there's been a long-standing and widespread consensus on the treatment of females in custody and in contact with the criminal justice system. Last year, the Justice Committee commissioned an inquiry which concluded that they're concerned about the lack of progress the government had made against the aims and objectives of the female offender strategy. They say the programme had lacked the investment needed to make the aims of the strategy achievable in reality. Well, the Ministry of Justice has promised more funding in the sector, with £9.5 million invested in community services since the publication in 2018, and a further launch of grants worth up to £24 million last September. They've also awarded almost £46 million to charities such as Advance to deliver support to women in the criminal justice system between June 2021 and March 2025. And finally, an extra £500,000 a year of funding has been promised to have a pregnancy and mother and baby liaison officer role in every women's prison. That's to ensure early identification, contact and signposting to support services. But whether all that helps those three strategic priorities become a reality in the future, well, we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you for watching.